I'd like to invite our previous speakers and also a couple of additional panel members to our panel. First of all, there's Karthik Ramanahan. He's project manager for Yokogawa. And then there's Destin Day, director of perfect execution for Emerson Automation Solutions. All right, I hope people have been accumulating questions for the speakers and panel members, but to begin with, what I'd like to do is start with Karthik and ask him to tell a little bit about yourself and try to keep it under a half an hour or 30,
Hello everyone, good afternoon. My name is Karthik Ramon. As Dick mentioned, I'm a project manager at Yokogawa. I joined Yokogawa back in 2003 and have been mostly on the operations side, working in various capacities from application engineer to more recently a project manager. When I joined in 2003, my first assignment was an application engineering role on the Shell Norco reinstrumentation program, where I was very lucky to work with Hansuk. And that was no small job. It was roughly 50 to 60,000 IO. And kept me busy for the next 8 years, I think. Thereafter, I went on to do some more work as a lead engineer for some oil sands projects up in Canada, and been back in Houston since. So with that, I'll hand off to Destin.
Thank you. Destin?
Good afternoon. My name is Destin Day. I work with Emerson. As you see, my title is Director of Perfect Execution, so I get a lot of questions about that. What that means is I'm specifically responsible for trying to get all of our execution activities more towards that perfect side of things. So it's a pretty lofty title with a lot of expectation. I run a number of continuous improvement initiatives within our company, but also interact with our customers and normally people on projects and try to understand how can we do things better. So as we get into some of the discussions, I've been on a research team for modularization with the Construction Industry Institute in the past. I've also worked previously in previous roles as a control systems engineer with an end user, with an EPC, also within Emerson, an automation supplier. I've also run projects, a number of modernization projects, worked on greenfield projects. So I've got a pretty wide understanding of a lot of different things that happen within the different parts of the industry, and I always try to bring that perspective. One of the things that I think really relays back to the conversation that we've had over the course of the last few days is that the technology typically has been there. The opportunity to take advantage of it has not been taken, and I think it really relies back towards a lot of times our internal processes and our project processes that we have perfected over the years. As Dave said, he's been looking at this for 30 years, looking at pneumatics, phasing into electronics, and then we start to look at the processes and say we're still perfecting those, but not necessarily taking advantage of the new technology. So that's really where some of my focus is right now, is how do we make those changes within all the organizations.
Thank you very much, Destin. In fact, your job title caused me to come up with a question, which is, for all the panel members, what would you say is the number one thing to pay attention to make sure, or to at least give you a good start towards a perfect executed project? Maybe I'll start down that end with David. What do you think? Well, what would be the number one thing that you would want to pay attention to?
Process.
The process.
Getting the process information set from the very beginning. All of your other disciplines, then the work flows very well. Okay. If the process is not set at the beginning and you try to run like we do jobs today, parallel engineering, it just has a ripple effect.
Yeah. And I assume when you say process, you mean the way the people work on the team.
I'm talking about the process data.
The process data, okay.
Very first thing that has to be right.
All right, good one. Thomas?
Yeah, I came more out on the technology view, but I think the interfaces between the different domains as we know them, are very important. It's are typical the positions where information are gone away and has to work out again. So you have always interloops, or you have always loops where you have to work out new information which are actually have been there.
Karthik.
Yeah, in my experience, I think the human factor probably plays the biggest role. The establishment of trust between the supplier and the customer, making sure that during the design phase that takes place. And I have noticed that on projects such as Shell Norco, that played a huge role where essentially the technical team just worked as one. There was no concept of customer and supplier. Of course, when it comes to procurement and management, obviously there's that distinction, but when it comes to the technical team, that I think makes a big difference.
Right. Hansuk.
Being a project manager, of course, I would have to say it's feed as well as people, right?
Okay.
So it's really about making sure that your plan is good up front, and so that later on, when you get into detailed design part, you can just blow and go, and there aren't changes. Changes kill you at the end. So it's got to be feed.
Yeah. Destin.
Well, I think probably a couple of us, the project managers, have all probably weighed in and said at least people, and I think people are definitely critical to the success. And what I would say is that if you're not encouraging the project team specifically to continue to look at out-of-the-box solutions, you may run that risk that they're following a procedure, and that procedure takes them right down the path that you did not want to go. So I think if we can, if you really are looking to make sure that your project's going to get off to a good start, make sure you've got people that are empowered to raise, issues and opportunities that you can really address in real time.
Thank you. Any questions from the audience? There's one over here. And another one over here. Okay, great. Thank you, folks.
Doug Lutz, Nova Chemicals. I have a question for Thomas. It would suggest that your MTP files are predetermining how your graphics are going to be represented to your operators. So my question is, how have the customers received that, and what kind of discussions have you had with respect to now you're putting a canned graphic within their existing framework that may not look the same as their existing graphics?
Yes. That is an interesting question, and we focused not. Let's start like this. We have this NAMU working group focusing on HMI. They are the specialists for HMI and for operator inside, and they actually decide what information is shown on which equipment. So. They make a huge table, and this table includes every equipment which is usually on an HMI, like pumps, valves, and so on. And they decided which variable and which data and which information it's shown through this equipment. And the MTP specification is modeling actually this table. And so every control project which is running inside the module is or has to be valid against this table and has to offer all data which is usually designed by that equipment. Is it answering your question?
My question was,
I understand.
So my question more was around are customers resisting that type of canned graphic? Because their existing graphics that the operator might be looking at may have a complete different representation, maybe different alarm management strategy, and now they're basically being forced to fit that mold that the WTP file says that they need to be representing that data.
Yeah. We are following the library concept as this big table is decides which information is be shown as this equipment or to this equipment. The DCS vendor could build a library following also this big table. So every module which is read in by an MTP file looks the same. And as a library normally include the library in the goal system, in the DCS system, normally include all the alarm behavior. The alarm behavior through all modules are the same. Yeah.
I think there was another question right down here. Thank you.
Good afternoon. John Cooley from Procter & Gamble. I'd like to know how much you rely on dynamic simulation during your vendor acceptance testing to help you weed out bugs in your logic and programming. And if so, how successful are those simulations? And what level of fidelity would you apply? A crude level simulation or a high level fidelity to help ensure good system troubleshooting?
From a supplier standpoint, what we have generally seen the biggest challenge with dynamic simulation on projects is that typically in order for the integration testing of the OTS to take place, they require a fully tested project configuration database. And although it is ideal to have the OTS come ahead of the actual system FAT, that generally does not take place. So in order to mitigate that, what we have done on some past projects is we have passed on the application data ahead of time once we finish implementation. Although there's a lot of bugs, it's only gone through a single iteration of internal testing. The OTS project kicks off. It can start doing all the virtual I/O integration, and the model integration testing can start. And that way, at least shortly thereafter, after FAT, a lot of the bugs which are found during dynamic simulation can then be fed back to the project team to make changes to the actual project database. And that can go on all the way till up to startup and commissioning, and even thereafter.
Anyone else want to respond to that? David? No? Destin?
I'm just going to say I think that the level of fidelity is really driven by our customers. And typically what we're seeing is really the low and medium being utilized, I think, during the project. In some instances, we do have high fidelity, and it does take additional effort, obviously, to get there. If you set your project up and structure it in such a way, there are some input that you require in order to get to that level, but we are able to do it. But I think one of the questions you asked was really around the percentage. I don't think it's a very high percentage is what I would say right now. I think more so with some more programmatic, and then obviously on modernizations where we actually have current data that we can actually use maybe as an input. So we're not necessarily doing it more so on greenfields, but I think in a brownfield situation it actually lends itself to more instances that way.
Good. Any other questions there's a question back here. Yep.
This is Mike Williams, representing ARC. Question directed to Destin first, and the other panelists also. I saw in some of the slides there the mention of high-value engineering centers. My question is, what are the critical success factors from a project perspective for effectively engaging high-value engineering centers?
Okay. Well, I would say communication is probably the number one thing. That's really not a new concept, I think, as far as high-value engineering centers. One of the things that we typically do, as far as how our approach is to it, everything that we're moving everything towards being able to do cloud-based type engineering. And so, in essence, you treat every office as a key office, and so there is no differentiation, and it really doesn't actually impact the actual work. So what you're looking at in those particular cases is the concept is I have a task, I need to have someone take care of it. It's located in the cloud, who has access and who has time to be able to get into it. And I think as long as you keep the parameter of how you operate in that sense, then you're in a good situation. The communication is always there, and so in some cases you set up a phone call, but I would say it's no different than this morning. A number of people, including myself, joined a phone call at 7 a.m. We joined the call. We're remote from some other location, and it's essentially the communication being the key factor.
Typically, when we work on these big greenfield projects, we do have a lot of high-value engineering centers, but when we work with the different EPCs. But what we also insist on is that we have a representative right there in the office, and we talk to them directly and let them do the correspondence and communication. We do have very early morning or late afternoon meetings, but we do have somebody right there with us that we hold responsible and accountable.
Yeah, and I'll echo the same. I think most of your EPCs right now utilize high-valued engineering centers around the world. And exactly what they both said is the communication. You know, you typically have early morning and/or late night calls, sometimes both, depending on who you're working with, whether it's in India or the Philippines or wherever. But it's part of our normal work practices now. It's here.
And one of the things I've also found to be extremely valuable is if you could have the lead engineers at the high-value engineering center come over for the testing phase and participate with the customer. That has usually been a very valuable adder. I'm sorry, I can't see.
Yes.
Yes,
feed.
absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, the earlier that you can engage them to where they understand what the parameters are around every specific project, the better off you're going to be. And again, constant communication.
There's a question over there, Alan.
Barry McGregor, Dow Chemical. How do you do quality control in those centers where it's on the cloud?
Again, you've got, usually the lead office is either Houston or Calgary or Amsterdam or one of our main offices. And they do an audit and or check of the engineering documents that come through there. If they see more checking is needed, then we'll get into more checking. But typically you're going to do a 10% audit and make sure that the quality is good. But again, if you got the communication going right and your teams are very much connected, you typically don't see a lot of those errors. I'm not going to say that communication happens well all of the time. I'd be lying to you if I told you it did. But that is one of the keys, and you need to make sure that we're monitoring whatever is being produced.
I think I would also comment that it is, again, we are using engineers that are trained and also have, in a lot of cases, done projects, globally, whether they've come to the United States, if we're talking about, U.S.-based execution. They've worked on projects local with us at some point, and they've gone back maybe to a different office and become a lead there. So again, in my personal view, how I look at things, it's the trust factor of I'm working with a team that maybe has 20 people. I have 5 leads that I call on, and they have accountability for the team that's working, with them. They happen to be located in a room next door. And so the question is, how often do I need to go over and check on the folks in the room next door that are working? And that's more of a situational type instance. If you are running into quality issues, obviously you put more time on that. But I could argue that everything again is part of our normal operation, and if you treat it exactly like you would a team that's located in the room, you get the similar results out of that. If you say, well, I'm going to treat it like I'm handing it to someone who's not part of my organization and who's essentially I'm outsourcing some type of work, then I think then you're going to get a different result. It's really around your mindset. So our employees located globally can be pulled at any time, no matter what office, to work on it, and then that's kind of the perspective that we keep on it.
Thank you. Answer?
The other thing that I've done when I've had a certain issue with quality, it generally comes from a certain area. I want to get to the bottom of it immediately. And so when I see something happening and it seems to be on somewhat of a, there's an issue there, I usually ask for a root cause analysis. done on it, and so that we can fix what the issue is, because it is a systemic issue. So we need to improve the work processes. So I do ask for root cause analysis. We get it fixed because we don't want any of these problems plaguing us out in the field.
Okay, we have a question over here.
Yeah, Harish Malkani from Arconic. Typically, I mean, we have automation projects that range in size and flavor right across the company. And one of the things that we've struggled with most is, how do you get to quantify the value of doing that automation by itself? So, for example, we might have a larger vision that says that, okay, if you automate your entire line, we can articulate the benefit of doing that in terms of productivity, quality, so on and so forth, right? But the businesses typically have their hands tied on how much investment they can make. And then they ask us, well, if you just did this piece, can you articulate the value for that? So as experienced project managers in automation, do you have any comment on how to sort of negotiate that kind of question?
So it's obviously an easier answer when it comes to greenfield projects rather than brownfield projects. But as Hyunsuk kind of pointed out, for migration projects, the real value goes up exponentially once you invest in advanced process control. And the optimization exercises you do once you have the basic control in place. And that is where I have found in the past that you can definitely put a study together ahead of time on how much you can improve your production and what the ROI could be for a migration brownfield style project. For a greenfield project, it's more about starting up on time. So it's more about being under budget and on schedule. And that is, the ROI is evident because then you start production. So.
Good. Any other comments on that?
At the end of the day, it's all about throughput, right? And so it's what's required to get the increased throughput. And so if you show them that if they only did this piece of it when this much is required, then they aren't going to get the returns that they wanted, right? And so there's a certain amount of hardware that's required as well as the software to back it that's needed. And so you just give options. This is what it takes to do it, and if you do less, then you aren't going to get that. So it's really about being very transparent with different stakeholders, and a lot of it is about herding cats and getting the stakeholder buy-in. And once they understand what's required for the different scenarios, then the scope moves forward, right? Project moves forward with that scope. So
Well, I think
it's a conversation.
Part of her presentation also is what are you losing right now with the automation system that you have in place, with the instrumentation that you've got in place. If you can demonstrate that to your project folks, to show if we upgrade this to what the new technology is, then you'll eliminate those losses that you're not really seeing as a result of it. So, and unlike what she said, I think brownfield's sexy. It's like putting a puzzle together. You got to figure out what's there and re-put it back together with the new technology. So I always like those.
Yeah, especially as the puzzle's running down the road, right?
Exactly.
Another question over here.
Doug Lutz, Noble Chemicals. My question is around cutover, hot cutover versus cold cutover. We have brownfield plants, we have aging equipment, eventually we're going to have to replace it. So if you're replacing everything from the ground floor, it's obviously you're going to have to be in a shutdown scenario. But there's situations where you're just doing a migration of the technology. What's your philosophy around encouraging that as a hot cutover? Any risks, benefits to doing that?
I'm personally a fan of hot cutovers. Okay, I like to minimize things during shutdowns. The reason why is because you don't want the whole plant to come down put in a brand new system, and then there's a systemic error that you didn't know about as you were doing it. And so sometimes when you do the whole thing cold, it's very difficult to bring it back up. Okay, I like to plan it in advance and really do the hot cutover scenario and plan for it right up front. And so during the shutdowns, put everything in place to do the hot cutovers. So that's really the preferred, and also it's the least disruption really to operations.
And I'll go ahead and just throw out the opposite, because I think ultimately it comes down to what is your scope and how much time do you have. If you have a planned outage and it's going to be sufficiently long and you're willing to do the front end planning, then I would definitely do a cold. If you have a process that's up and running right now and you say we're going to keep it up and we do something hot, unfortunately, the instances where we've seen where there has been an issue doesn't always come from the automation project scope. It was some known failure, which was the reason why you were looking at doing your modernization anyway. That actually happened. And so when it goes down, they always look over at the team that was in the building and say, "It's you guys." Well, we're like, we didn't touch anything. So I guess I would say it really just depends on the timing and the scope of what you're doing. If you're depends on what you're cutting over from and to, and then how much time do you have. So again, there are some times where you've seen a planned shutdown. We've seen it in a number of instances where no automation scope whatsoever, shutdown scope end up being a lot longer. For an automation team, sometimes that's all we needed, right? Is, hey, they're going to extend the cutover, or the turnaround is going to be extended by another couple of weeks or a couple of days or a couple of months in some instances. Sometimes that's perfect for us. So it really just depends. Something you have to be willing to invest front end to do that planning.
And I'll go in the middle, because I've done both. I've done hot cutovers before, and I've done them when there's a shutdown. Both. But specifically on the hot cutover, you need to make sure you've got a plan worked out, understanding exactly what she said, all of the risks that are involved, and plan for the unplanned. But planning is the key to both.
Any other questions? We have time for one more question. Anybody have one? Okay, well, I have one. Panel members, if you could come up with one or two takeaways you want the audience to remember this session about. What would be a key thing that you want them to remember about perfect process, perfect project execution? Want to start down that end? Or we'll start here. We'll start with Dustin.
Perfect execution.
Well, I guess one thing I would just say, if you're looking at implementation, and trying to get, again, we're looking at, capital efficiency and trying to do the front end planning the right way. I think it's very important for you to, one, make sure that you're really committed to actually implementing something that's more transformational. If you're going to do it, you can't take it lightly. It's not something that you should say, I think as Dave pointed out, you need to try to go with a white, sheet of paper and say, here is a new opportunity for me, and let me kind of look at my options. If you come in and you've already formulated your response, here's how I'm going to do it ahead of time, I think most of the times you'll find that you'll get stuck somewhere and you'll stop. So I think keeping a real open mind at the very beginning on transformational type opportunities is really the key.
I have to agree with that. I believe right in the very beginning you have to be very open to all new ideas and different ways of doing things in the most efficient ways possible. Do a lot of lessons learned, a lot of research, and be very transparent with all the stakeholders. Make sure you know what success looks like at the end, and you're aiming for that. Okay, you don't want to be at the trying to get funding, and then it's like, oh, well, we didn't really want you to do that. So you have to understand what it is up front, make sure that you're planning for it, and there's lots and lots of communication. I think a big thing of understanding that the front ends are usually very messy. It's like sort of like a democracy, right? Dictatorships are much simpler, but you end up with a really great product at the end with lots of input.
So everything that Hyunsuk and Destin just said, and I'll add to that and say that all the time spent up front in doing a detailed field survey and ensuring that we are working with a high quality set of inputs and data obviously goes a long way in ensuring success. Also, you know, with all the new emerging technologies, a lot of which, you know, we've all been talking about here at ARC, thinking outside the box should be encouraged. The new project execution methodologies definitely should be considered up front.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm the right person for answering this question on perfect processes. What we actually did is we automated the engineering process and cut it, the time-critical decisions out of the main engineering processes and put it in the time uncritical process. So maybe this is an approach for future planning processes, just to put out the really critical and the really heavy decision and lay them in on the process where they don't count so much.
Very good.
So I'll end this with what everybody else said and add to it. Don't get stuck in what we know. Challenge everything that we've done as far as the work process is up to date, and look at the technology that is in front of us, and don't try and put a square peg in a round hole. Look at what the technology dictates and do your work processes based on what it dictates, not what you know.
Great, thank you. That's a great words of wisdom to end on. I want to thank everybody in the audience, but please join me in thanking the panel for doing an excellent job.